Hello everyone, welcome back to the Unenlightened University. Slightly different theme for today. We're going to be looking at some ancient civilizations. I'm really interested in ancient civilizations, and I'm hoping to make this a bit of a series where we do a quick introduction to the ancient civilizations, give us a good groundwork in understanding their culture, who they were, and sort of why they're well known. So today, we're going to be looking at the first one, the first civilization, the ancient Sumerians. Got a PowerPoint that we're going to run through, so let's get started. So my main source, I'll be doing this for each of the civilizations that we look at as providing a source. My main source is the Sumerians, their history, culture and character by Samuel Noah Krahmer. It's this man here. He's a really great author from what I've read. I've only read this book of his, but I've really enjoyed it. It's a fantastic introduction. Before this, I knew a little bit about the Sumerians, not a lot. But yeah, he does it in very good sections. There's a section on the gods, their religion, the way that they developed in the cities and stuff like that. It's a very good read and highly recommended. And sort of most of my information really does come from this man here. So let's move on. How do we know what we know? Basically, is sort of the one question that we like to ask to start off with. We have a couple of interesting things. We have the ziggurats of Ur up in this corner here. So we know from this sort of structure that they built temples and they were quite a religious group of people. I also think this served as a royal palace at some point, but I'm not entirely sure on that. We also have surviving clay documents, writing from this time. On one side, we have the Sumerian kings list, which is sort of a semi-mythical, semi-probable list of Sumerian kings, the sort of ways in which they lived and how long they lived for. So it's a really valuable document to have found. We also have the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is an ancient story, Sumerian legend, Mesopotamian legend pieced together, and we also have a decorative wall here of soldiers, things like that. So that's sort of how we know what we know. We've literally found documents supporting what they say, or fragments of documents. Worth noting is that archaeology, unfortunately, does tend to draw up pieces, but not whole pictures of past civilizations. So we don't know a huge amount, or as much as we perhaps would like to, but we do know a fairly substantial amount considering how long ago they lived. So where did they live? They lived in the cradle of civilization, or one of the cradles of civilization, in the Fertile Crescent region. So we can see the city of Ur sort of sits in modern-day Iraq. It was a largely inhospitable terrain, but it allowed for sort of the development of agriculture because there was regular flooding, and some people I've talked to suggest that the actual pressure of the terrain and the environment meant people had to develop agriculture in order to survive, and thus evolve civilizations because they essentially had to, because there wasn't enough bountiful resources to hunt and gather anymore. The climate didn't allow trees to grow, so there wasn't a huge amount of accessible wood, and also there wasn't a large amount of accessible stone, as they lived on a riverbed. So the wood factor means there couldn't be any real wooden construction, and the stone meant there couldn't be any stone construction. So they would use clay mainly, and we see that in the documents that we have. They're written in clay tablets. It's probably one of the reasons they've been able to survive for so long. And they would sort of use clay baked together with water reeds to construct their houses. And then later on in their civilization, they began to make baked bricks out of the river clay, which is what we then saw with the ziggurat of Ur there. So when the Sumerian civilization, or sometimes called the Mesopotamian or Babylonians in the Bible, lived in 4,500 BCE to 1900 BCE. So a long period of time, but around 6,500 years ago. A largely distant time period, one that we don't really have a full understanding of, and one that we've sort of only been able to piece together in modern times. It's also about 1,000 years before the Egyptians came into existence. So an extremely, extremely long time ago, and basically is at the start of written history. Society was one fairly typical of the Fertile Crescent. Civilization was able to develop into a society here because of the abundance of agriculture, allowing a ruling class to develop. As you know, not everyone had to spend all the time farming, so then you have, officials come out of it, craftsmen come out of it, that sort of thing. The underclass were slaves. It was a slave state, captured in warfare, sort of typical for, most of the civilizations in this region. The ancient Egyptians also practiced this as well, for reference. Sumerian law was also quite prevalent. We have quite a few law codes that have survived, fortunately. So typical sort of laws that you'd expect. If a man commits murder, that man must be killed. If a man commits robbery, he's killed. If a man commits kidnapping, he is imprisoned and is to pay 15 shekels of silver. If a slave marries a slave and that slave is set free, he does not leave the household. So essentially, we can see the society that this reflects. It's a society of an eye for an eye, one that values property, and one that sort of sees slaves as a important asset, though not one that they want to lose control of. We can also see that there's a Sumerian social structure here. So the king would be on top. His nobles would then be below it. Then you'd have the commoners, so merchants, craftsmen, fishermen, that sort of thing. And then the, of course, underclass would be the slaves, which would do a lot of the back-breaking manual labour of farming and other such laborious tasks. Literacy and mathematics. Obviously, being the first civilization, they were able to use text to understand it. We can sort of see the development of some words here. For instance, an, meaning sky or heaven, develops over time into a much more uniform sort of one that would recognize as writing rather than a symbolic factor. As well, the sag or head person capital section here is very interesting. The person goes from a literal head to a lying down head to a less head-shaped letters, and then letters that we'd recognize as Sumerian today. So it's really quite interesting to see this development. Also, by the way, the text is called cuneiform, and the number system, which works on a base pair of 60, is a sexagesimal base pair. This may seem strange to us, considering we now, in the Western world at least, have a base pair of 10. Rather unique. Us, actually, I would have assumed before studying the Sumerians that everywhere around the world would use base pairs of 10s because, well, we have 10 digits on our hands. However, what I wanted to show you was this isn't the case, and actually this system does make a lot of sense. So if we look at a pair of hands to develop Y60, we can see that you don't actually have, you have typical 10 digits here, which we'd describe in the Western world, but actually you have 1 crease, 2 crease, 3 crease, then 6, then 9, then 12. So you'd have 12. Then you could stick up one of the fingers on the other hand, and then you could start again. Then you had 24, and so on and so forth, until you have 5 times the 12, and you'd end up with a base pair of 60. So they'd count there with their hands in a very different way, which is quite interesting. This term, rather unfortunately, through the, I don't know what to call it, deluge of ancient alien propaganda, the Anunnaki were, a pantheon of gods similar to ancient other religions. A priest would conduct large performance rituals, and would have several important functions, such as managing the irrigation system. So the priest class is a sort of an elite body of people who would practice religion as well as manage a lot of public infrastructure. Sumerians, similar to the Aztecs, believe that the world was created in a series of cosmic births. Many historians agree that the early religion was also influenced many texts, such as the Bible. For instance, the ancient Sumerians believed man was made from clay, and this is later found in the Christian and Hebrew Bibles. They also believed that the Earth is a flat dome surrounded by seawater, so they would be on the flat Earth's side today. The afterlife is perhaps one of the strangest and most interesting things I find about the Sumerians. from what we've been able to figure out from the tablets, is the Sumerian afterlife was a dark, dreary cavern located deep underground. Life essentially continued the same as it did above ground, except it was a grey, shadowy place where all souls would go to and then sort of carry on their life eternally as it had been on the surface. So it's a bit strange. However, more importantly, which is quite interesting, they also believed that the shadowy realm known as Ker had nothing to eat or drink, so family members would often, pour ritualistic drink, probably some sort of ale, into the graves of dead people, thereby allowing the dead to drink. So we sort of see early forms of ancestor worship in effect here as well. So that's the Sumerians, a rather interesting group of people. Fortunately, we have a piece of music surviving from them, so I'll play that as we leave today. Thank you so much for watching. This has been the Unenlightened University, signing off.
Udre